Welcome everyone to the VACO pre-conference session on the energy of tomorrow. I'm Joe Lurch, Director of Local Government Policy. And I want to thank our sponsor for today, Dominion Energy, who is sponsoring this as part of our pre-conference breakout session. We have two speakers today with experts in the field. I'm going to introduce our first speaker who will give us a presentation. We'll go through some Q&A and then I'll introduce the second speaker. Our first speaker today is John Warren, who was appointed the Director of the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy back in August of 2015. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from Virginia Tech and a master's in public administration from VCU. Mr. Warren's career began in industrial construction, but his mechanical engineering background led him to Henrico County, where he served in facilities management and was tasked with reducing the energy footprint of county buildings. So he definitely has a background in county service. We want to thank him for that. He then served as DMME's Director of Energy from 2000 to 2007, followed by private sector work in the alternative fuels and green chemicals industry. Mr. Warren's understanding of Virginia's unique combination of natural resources, technology base, university and research capacity, and business and industry growth opportunities helps guide DMME in the execution and support of programs of Virginia's mineral and renewable energy resources. And with that, John, I'll kick it over to you, and I will go ahead and switch it over to your slides.
Great, Joe. Thank you very much.
You can go ahead and let me know when I need to advance the slide, and I'll do that.
Yeah. So the first slide, we've had a number of initiatives over the last few years. There was the Grid Modernization Act, the previous legislative year. There's the Virginia Clean Economy Act. We had Executive Order 43, which was Governor Northam's executive order on energy. And there was a lot of overlap in those. They kind of build on each other. So this Clean Energy Virginia is the logo we've put on those initiatives. We kind of wrapped them under one umbrella and calling it Clean Energy Virginia. And really, Clean Energy of Virginia is about meeting the goals of the Virginia Clean Economy Act that was passed. Okay, next slide, Joe. And so the objectives are 100% carbon free. And I like to frame this in the terms of a state-of-the-art modern grid. You know, to be able to get to 100% carbon free, there's no way to do that without doing some significant upgrades to the grid and making the grid a modern grid and being allowed to integrate all of the distributed generation, rooftop solar, all the different sources of generation that are going to be coming from different directions and be coming into the grid from a number of different areas and locations. So it really is the 100% carbon-free transition is just as much about the grid as it is to build new generation assets, new clean energy assets that replace the more conventional ones. Big part of what we're doing too is to incorporate social justice, environmental justice, energy justice, make sure that the underserved communities have access to some of these new generation assets, can take advantage of them, and then they're not disadvantaged by infrastructure that might be harmful to their communities. Next slide. Yeah, so this was from Executive Order 43. It was 30% by 2030, and then the Clean Economy Act, you know, it upped the ante on that, and it's 100% carbon free. 2050, it's 2045, depending on what service territory you're in. 2050 is Appalachian, and 2045 is Dominion, but the idea is 100% by 2050. Next slide. So the actions that help us get there, Virginia established a mandatory renewable portfolio standard as part of the Clean Economy Act, and that's probably one of the largest steps. It also includes mandatory energy efficiency resource standard. Energy efficiency is clean energy. Even though it's reducing energy, it has the same impact. It'll reduce the impacts on the grid as well. And in order to get the generation assets that we need some big projects. And there you have the 16,000 megawatts of solar and onshore wind and the 5,200 megawatts of offshore wind. And that is paired with 2,700 megawatts of energy storage being declared in the public interest. Next slide. Regulatory changes, considering the social cost of carbon is a big step. The second point is what I just mentioned about disadvantaged communities, making sure that they can take advantage of the new technologies, but also not be disadvantaged with a disproportionate amount of the infrastructure. And the percentage of income payment program makes sure that low-income households aren't overburdened by their energy bills. Next slide. We had a series of webinars that started back in July and went through August. The 5 topic areas are the main topic areas that we discussed, and the major steps at moving towards 100% carbon free. They were very, very well attended, and we got a lot of good response from those webinars. Had a lot of really good subject matter experts partnering on them, and it went very well. Did a lot of outreach and education with those 5 seminars. Next slide. So the energy efficiency resource standard be a big move for energy efficiency. It establishes, quantitative requirements. It creates new programs. Again, addresses impacts on disadvantaged communities, and it puts investments into residences and occupants of homes that have a lot of energy burden. So it covers a lot of areas to help reduce energy and be a big strategy towards clean energy grid. Next slide. Distributed generation is one thing that's going to, again, complicate what it takes to modernize the grid and to make sure that all these generation assets can do their part. The mandatory renewable portfolio standard has a DG carve out, so distributed generation will be a part of the generation assets that go into the renewable portfolio standard. In order to help that along, the net metering cap was increased from 1% to 6%, which is very significant. 1% has been around for a long time, and it took many, many years to get to the 1% point. And so adding an additional 5 times that will allow a lot of additional behind the meter installations to take place. And the net metering cap allows small businesses and homeowners to own systems, to put them behind the meter, and to reduce their power consumption. Third-party power purchase agreements are a financing mechanism usually used for some of the larger systems. They can be used on small systems as well, but they have really helped facilitate installation at government buildings and businesses where the owners of those buildings may not be able to necessarily afford the entire cost. This allows a third party to install, maintain, and operate the system. And it is almost like a service contract where you pay for the kilowatt hours that are put on the meter from the generation asset that's under the agreement. So you're not buying the system. You're just buying the power that the system generates. Shared solar and multifamily shared solar, the shared solar programs will be a good tool for local governments. They allow centralized installations to be shared with residences and households that might not necessarily have the room, the space, the right orientation to the sun. There's a lot of reasons why putting solar panels on the roof of your house or your garage might not work for you. So this is an opportunity for a community type solar program to where you can buy into a system that's not located on your property. The Clean Energy Advisory Board has been developed and has been doing a lot of work at coming up with programs that will help the underserved communities, and the shared solar is one of those target areas. And we also have a program now that Virginia is really starting to get momentum. It's the Soul Smart program, and it is a technical assistance program that really is aimed at local governments. And we've had a number of local governments join the Soul Smart program, and I would encourage all of the VACO members to take a look at that, look at Soul Smart. We have a subject matter expert on our staff. Carrie Hearn is her name, and some of y'all might know her. She is reaching out to a lot of local governments and trying to help them with decision making on solar programs. So check out Soul Smart. It's a really good program, and it is really gaining momentum, and you'll be surrounded by a number of peers. Next slide. Energy storage, the next big technology challenge. I don't know if any of the audience has been paying attention to the news in Martinsville, but they've got a very impressive project going on in Martinsville in conjunction with Appalachian Power. They're putting in a very new emerging technology type system, and it's been real interesting to follow that. I encourage you to take a look at that too, to go in the browser and to Google Martinsville and battery storage, and you will see a lot of really good information on what's happening there, and it's rather exciting. Those are the types of installations that we'll need and be able to integrate into the grid in order to manage the capacity on the grid with respect to intermittent resources that are becoming more and more of the supply source, and conventional sources which are becoming less of the supply source. Okay, so next slide. Utility scale solar and onshore. This is mainly utility scale solar. Our onshore wind projects have been limited to one. There's been some notices of intent that have been put in for at least one other onshore wind project. Onshore wind is it's a big challenge for Virginia, mainly because of where the wind resources are. There's a lot of very efficient onshore wind in the western part of the country where land is flat, and they can set up onshore wind arrays similar to what we're planning to do out in the ocean, similar to an offshore wind. We don't have that luxury in Virginia. All of our wind resources that are worthy of generating electricity from are mainly along ridge tops in the mountainous regions of Virginia. It's very hard to navigate. It's very hard to do site prep. So there's a lot of things that really challenge the economics of onshore wind. I don't see that as being a big business in Virginia, but certainly see the opportunity for there to be more than the one project we have in the pipe right now. So next slide. And offshore wind, you, I'm sure, have heard a lot about offshore wind. Virginia is involved in a number of different ways. We call it the three-legged stool between Virginia's own commercial area, Virginia's opportunity to be a hub for the supply chain, which would be a supply chain for a lot of the Northeast build out and the build out in North Carolina and also in South Carolina, if they ever get a lease area, a lot of the supply chain operations could potentially come out of Norfolk. Norfolk is by far the best location up and down the East Coast to perform those functions, and location, location, location. That's not gone unnoticed by the supply chain companies that are coming over from Europe. So we really have a huge potential to add manufacturing and maritime type workforce. So we've got the workforce, the supply chain, and Virginia's own wind energy area to develop. And so we are working on all three of those things all at the same time. Next slide. And this is just some resources out there for localities. I encourage the localities to look into these. I'm sure most of the localities have become familiar with CPACE. That's a opt-in program. It allows you to provide financing to homeowners through your property tax system. And it really is an opportunity for small towns and other communities to rebuild their core building infrastructure and to do upgrades to that infrastructure and to incentivize the building owners with a financing opportunity that will help with that. So CPACE is a program that is gaining a lot of momentum in Virginia, and it has been very successful in a number of other states. So we're hoping that the localities will take advantage of this. And CPACE does allow and accommodates renewable energy systems to include solar. So a solar install could be built into a CPACE approved project. SolSmart, that's the program that I mentioned previously. It's got a lot of technical assistance that will make sure that the decision making is completely informed, and it will help public outreach in a number of other areas that local governments usually struggle with when it comes to opponents of solar projects. And it really helps provide the tools that local governments need to make sure that they are providing the right messaging to the public and that they don't get caught unexpectedly with opposition that they didn't realize was going to be out there. It's a really good program. It will help identify buildings. It does a number of things that will help in the decision-making process. And Sol Tax, that's just it's a tool that SolSmart has come out with. I'm not really familiar with that. I haven't gone on to this beta testing site, but I've heard a lot about it, and I heard that the folks that have looked at it said it's going to be a really good tool and very helpful. The guidance for localities, one thing that we've promoted before, and we've had booths at the VACO conference before, is our DGMR section. That's the geology section under DMME. We have a lot of tools that we can use to help determine land use decisions. A lot of times localities will look at land use in a two-dimensional fashion. They'll look at the map and understand where the roads and the wetlands and all of that stuff are. But we like to promote more of a 3D model. You want to know what's under the ground where you're building stuff. And there's a lot of opportunity. You might have really good aggregate resources to where you wouldn't have to support aggregate for a construction project. But on top of that, we've got analysis tools that we can use to analyze potential solar sites, their orientation to the sun, shading, and offer a lot of feedback there. We're also looking at trying to integrate into these tools ways to identify, from a standardized point of view, the underserved communities. There's been a lot of discussion with all of the social justice and environmental justice topics out there about what determines a low-income community. How do you draw the line? You know, who's eligible? And so I think that we can work with localities and really help delineate where those areas might be and where resources need to be placed or where you need to be careful about initiating certain types of development. So we'd like to help with that. It's a service that we started offering a couple of years ago, and we'd like to be able to share that expertise with the localities and basically, in general, help them do some long-term land use planning. Know where your resources and your assets are, know where your best opportunity for development is, and know where to put your energy infrastructure. I think that would be very helpful to local governments in long-term land use planning. So that was the end of the slides. There's a summary slide that's next that just goes back and lists the things that we talked about and that I've presented here. But the larger message for localities, I believe, in getting to this modern state-of-the-art grid is it's twofold. One thing that we've got going on in the state is to lead by example, is what we call it. The state's putting out all these policy initiatives that are going to lead to new programs, and it's kind of the put your money where your mouth is strategy, to where we want to lead by example, and we're putting solar on state buildings. We're looking at energy storage opportunities. And so I would encourage localities to kind of take the same posture. And it's kind of the work locally, think globally, do your part, and see what the localities can do to establish their own lead by example programs. And localities that are one of the early adopters of CPACE program and to join the Soul Smart program. I tell you, localities that can start developing metrics around how they are serving the underserved community, they're going to get a lot of attention, and they could get a lot of mileage out of being one of the leaders in working with the disadvantaged communities and making sure that they realize the benefits. And that's a big step, I think, to take, and it takes a commitment, but a lead by example approach. If one locality does it, that's great, but be a peer, and if other localities start to follow, a locality can go a long way in helping reach the goals of a clean and modern grid. And that was what I was going to say next? That leads me into the modern grid. I would say it's going to be very important. There's so much NIMBY out there in the world. If you're talking about substations, transmission lines, distribution systems, there's going to have to be a lot of technology added that will allow electricity to flow in different directions and accept all of these new supply streams from distributed generation. You know, localities that can work with their residents and work with their public and make sure that that's understood are going to be the real movers in this. It takes space, it takes sites, it takes construction work. Things are going to happen to get to this modern grid, and people aren't going to like it. People are going to want to oppose it because it's too close to their yard or too close to their business. And I think it's real important that's one of the most important things out there for local governments is to help make sure that when it comes to the grid and when it comes to power infrastructure, that it's for the right reasons. And we're going to be very careful. Virginia's going to be very careful about how these things are built and constructed. They're an environmental benefit. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the universal perception. And, you know, local governments have to be prepared for that. They have to understand that a reliable electric distribution system is of utmost importance, and that we can't get where we need to without doing upgrades to our grid and to the way that the meters are served and supplied. That is a huge challenge, and if we don't get started off on the right foot on that one, what we want to do is not going to happen. And people don't understand that the system that we're working with now, if we don't do anything, it doesn't last forever, and it will become increasingly unreliable, and new development will have a hard time committing and taking risk. The new businesses, new manufacturing, they're going to go where they have competitive, reliable electricity. And we can't add all of these new assets without upgrading the way that that power gets to our meters. It would be like replacing the small automotive fleet of America and not doing anything with the roads. You could have a really nice car parked in your garage, but if the roads between there and where you need to get to are not reliable, it doesn't do you any good. So it's kind of that same concept. We need to have the roadway, the pathway for all these electrons to flow and to make sure that they all get to where they need to get to, which is to the loads and to the customer meters. And that's my presentation.
All right, thank you, John. What we'll do, go ahead, we've got a couple moments for questions. I haven't seen any in the chat, but if people have questions for John, you want to go ahead and unmute, do not be shy. Andy, you have a question? Yes.
I do have a couple. So going back to my list, John, and thank you very much for all this stuff. Years ago, we're talking about EERS, which is something I didn't know about before today. And then you talked about distributed generation and the programs for energy efficiency. Several years ago, or 8 or 9 years ago, there was a big effort by the company to have old refrigerator trade-ins and a lot of things, which unfortunately never got approved by the SEC. So is the SEC also going to have its hand in this EES, or can this actually proceed along within management of the company? So that's my first one. I have others.
Anything that is mandated to the VCEA that calls on the utilities to perform, they'll do rulemaking. There's rulemaking going on right now with regards to the shared solar programs, and shared solar programs really are they are local government oriented, and so yeah, the State Corporation Commission for most of those strategies and mandates in the VCEA will go through some type of rulemaking process, and yeah, that would be important for the local governments to stay in touch with those processes and to send comments and to respond to those rulemakings with comments that make sure that that the program is usable and that it's accommodating. So yes, I would say that there will be FCC involved.
Okay. All right. And jumping down to wind, for the offshore wind category, we talked about Norfolk being such a great asset as far as its maritime workforce. Is there someone in DMME, or where does the outreach happen to the state workforce board and their agencies and the local to sort of step up, get ready for those employees to be needed? Or are we still 5 years away from that demand? Because there is a really great workforce. I mean, I'm in Albemarle, but there's a really great workforce work down there in the Hampton Roads that will be ready, but they need some time to get organized.
Yes, we've been working very closely with we've been working closely with all of the organizations down in Hampton. We recently just had a workforce announcement. There's a partnership formed to get employees or prospective employees trained and certified. And we really do want to spread that opportunity out to localities throughout the state. This one that was just announced includes educational centers that are not in the Hampton Roads area. So if Jennifer Palestrant is DMM's chief deputy, and she's our lead person on Offshore Wind. And I would encourage you to reach out to her. But if you go on our website, you'll find a lot of information on that, who's involved, who the players are, and there's a lot of gaps to be filled. So we would definitely be welcome of any locality that would be interested, especially if your locality has a community college in the area that wants to participate. There's a lot of opportunity there, and it doesn't have to be located in Hampton.
Okay, my very last question, I promise, is you mentioned about getting started on the right foot. And it's sort of an example of how your agency was put in a trap along with DEQ about not really being able to do what the local governments think we want you to do as far as representing the environmental side. And I'm using the pipelines as a perfect example. Those were allowed to just create a lot of long-lasting enmity that all of your agencies are going to have to face, and try not to repeat that mistake again. So, I mean, they're reclaiming that ability that you're going to do this correctly and without environmental damage is a big challenge. And so, I mean, we're still 100 miles away from some of the worst damage, but we hear about it here still locally all the time. And so which agency will also be involved throughout the length of some of these projects? I'm thinking of utility scale solar. And we learned a lot from North Carolina folks last year about the heavy metal contamination and things which they had found in their underground soils when solar sites were decommissioned, especially when the local governments were not smart enough or experienced enough to require complete removal. And so some of these local governments had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get in pull out all that old concrete and all that old wire. And then found that the going back to the agricultural use was not very easy because of the difference in the soil that had happened. So that's just one of those things where when you don't know, it creates a lot of concern. And so these are questions that you may be asked by others going forward. And thank you very much for being here today.
You're welcome. And I missed some of that. The signal got a little broken up. And I heard you mention the pipelines. And the pipelines, yeah, that's outside of DMME's authority, those interstate pipelines. And that is one of those things that that we didn't get involved with, couldn't get involved with, didn't have any authority over. The utility scale solar, that really has become a challenge of a lot of the larger, more populated counties. And we'd like to help with that. What I mentioned about DGMR, and our geologists are looking at land use planning from a three-dimensional model standpoint instead of a two-dimensional model. I really think that could help the localities understand where the best siting opportunities are.
All right, thank you, Ian. Did anybody else have any questions? Before we move on to our next speaker? All right, hearing none, I'm going to introduce, and thank you, John, and hopefully you can stay with us, and we may have more Q&A at the very end.
Okay.
John Larson joined Dominion Energy in 1996 and is currently the Director of Public Policy and Economic Development. During John's career at Dominion, he's held various leadership positions in business development, alternative energy technologies, and construction. Currently, a large part of his time is spent on Dominion Energy's business-to-business and workforce development and outreach activity as the company moves forward for the requirements of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, some of those targets that John Warren already touched on, and I think flows well into your questions about workforce development. So we look forward to hearing from John. So John, take it away.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be able to join. As you can see, I drew up a background here. It's the two turbines that are located offshore for the pilot project. It's been a very exciting time. If you've recently noticed, we just declared provisional acceptance and connected to the grid and generating power. I'm assuming that we've probably got a little wind today, so we should be seeing some generation come on shore. It's a 12 megawatt facility that can produce about 3,000 energy for about 3,000 homes. John hit on a lot of the key points that as we move forward with the various programs that have really come about with the GTSA, as well as a lot of clarification and codification of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, it's really put Virginia on a trajectory to move forward with, a very strong renewable portfolio standard. One of the key things that I think we're very fortunate in Virginia is, and John referenced this, the leadership here had the wisdom to understand that, well, we can move forward and make the transition to renewables. However, it is just as critical that we make sure we address the grid investment that has to take place, everything from distribution to transmission. And if you think about it, there are a number of projects. First off, you've got the offshore wind, the larger commercial project. You look at the volume of solar, whether it's large scale or whether it's small scale solar, and then battery storage. So where do you locate those batteries so that you can optimize the impact for the grid? And I think the key take home is, as we move forward, to think about the Virginia Clean Economy Act requirements and how we can all work together with the counties to understand what areas, as John mentioned, would be great to consider solar installation, what questions you may have as we would work through that. If you think about it and on real simple terms, across the Commonwealth, we need about 10,000 acres a year to be able to meet the requirements of the Virginia Clean Economy Act through 2035. That's a lot of land every year, and it's going to take a lot of coordination between the utilities as well as independent developers to move forward. And that doesn't include the small scale solar or the community solar or rooftop solar investments that would take place, nor does it really take into account the storage installations. So I think that importance of using those tools and working in the collaboration to be able to move forward is critical to success as we envision on how to move forward with the program. You know, we've outlined a pretty detailed plan. If you think about the IRP that the company filed, so that kicked off this past week with opening statements and public testimony, and today starts the first testimony from different parties in the proceeding. And it'll run at least through the end of this week is my belief. If you step back and look at that, by the time the act passed and the governor signed it, there was a very, very short period of time to prepare the IRP. So some very quick modeling done. The team did a great job of putting together the IRP, and that's the integrated resource plan. But obviously, we took the current cost data we had, we took the current knowledge about existing technologies and built out that plan. One of the nice things about the Clean Economy Act is that it does and is structured such that as technologies advance, John referenced storage technologies are advancing. In some of my prior work, we examined 3 different emerging battery technologies. So as you know, solar panels and solar arrays advance their technologies and storage, there's a lot of opportunity for the needs to change and to be able to optimize the locations and where we're going. But again, we've all got to work collaboratively together to make sure that we can address any questions or concerns that arise to move forward. So a lot of activity now underway, as I said, with the IRP. One of the items that Ann, you mentioned, was workforce development. So I do spend a lot of time right now on business to business and workforce development. And we have a number of activities that will be planned. We've been working very closely with the Hampton Roads Alliance for an initial session in which we'll move forward and more so awareness about, and I'll just start with offshore wind and then talk about how that can apply to other renewable sources. But with awareness about what it takes to participate in the project, move forward with working with local organizations there to support the interested businesses and help them understand requirements for safety, for environmental reporting, for even items such as contract surety. So how do you work with a financial institution? So we'll go through a series of that and then move forward into additional just wind technology education so that these companies can be better prepared as they move forward to eventual construction expositions with the prime contractors and the tier 2 contractors and tier 3 contractors, and be better positioned with how they can move forward and have a better opportunity to be a successful participant in the project. A great example is the last thing you want to do to walk up to someone in an offshore wind business is call a wind turbine a windmill, right? Immediately, they're just going to shake their head and say, this individual doesn't quite get it. So to that end, we've worked to develop, the first one of those will take place in Hampton Roads, but the plan is to duplicate those on a regional basis across the Commonwealth and work to engage with the multitude of support agencies and organizations that exist in each one of the regions to help the businesses be prepared and identify where they may have opportunities to present, say, an offshore wind. And as we move forward with the continued advancement of solar and storage. The concept is to take that same approach as we go and say, okay, what companies are interested? How do you get qualified? What do you need to do? And then let's do some education, and then facilitate the construction expos with the companies, as well as working to look on the economic development front on a regional basis to make sure that we think about, we've got a great opportunity here with the progressive posture that the Commonwealth took with regards to the renewable portfolio standard. We are certainly by far a leader in the Mid-Atlantic, if not the nation, for the direction that we're going. It's a great time to look at establishing a basis for supply chain to support those technologies. While solar arrays may not be manufactured per se in the U.S., there are a lot of other aspects of a solar project that are manufactured domestically. And why not looking at moving some of those operations to Virginia? Certainly, at least our operations bases and centers as we move forward. So a lot of opportunity as you look across the broad basis for what's coming forward. I guess I think we had roughly an hour here, Joe. So I tried to hit a few high points. And again, I'd like to reiterate, one of the most critical aspects is to work together to identify sites for the renewable infrastructure and accommodate the interconnection to the grid that has to take place and the upgrade to the grid, and working together so that we can identify 10,000 acres a year to build large-scale solar, and then lesser acreage, but still just as important small-scale and storage infrastructure.
All right, well, thank you, John. Maybe before we open it up again to questions, one thing that I wanted to touch on real quick to maybe ask you both, and it was something that we brought up with this subcommittee yesterday when we held our regular meeting, is what about the role of strategic nuclear? I know, John, that your agency has been tasked with coming up with a strategic nuclear plan. I think it's in the governor's office right now being reviewed. How much do you see that being a part of meeting our clean energy goals by 2045?
I don't see additional nuclear generation as being part of that mix, but certainly we need the existing current nuclear generation to contribute that mix. So I don't expect or anticipate any new permits for new reactors, but I would expect the need to continue to rely on the certain North Canada plants that we have. That report that from the consortium really is, we staff that those folks, they are really more from a technology and a manufacturing standpoint. Most of the members of that consortium are involved in technology and manufacturing and not in power generation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would echo that the existing stations and moving forward with license extensions are critical to be able to continue the amount of energy that those two stations generate are significant. And as John referenced, there's a lot of activity around the small modular reactors, but we really don't see at this point in time anything that is commercially out there that you could start the development process, and those technologies are emergent technologies, could well have a place in the future as we approach the end of the horizon. But near term, I don't envision that you'll see a new nuclear reactor in the Commonwealth right now.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Anybody attending want to have any other questions? Mr. Crozier?
Yes, I guess as much comments as questions. It was mentioned getting off on the right foot. our Commonwealth, as well as the contractors building these solar arrays, did anything but get off on the right foot. And I can assure you, it's going to be a very, very hard battle, a very uphill battle to convince jurisdictions that we're going to give up the space of Fairfax County to solar arrays in the Commonwealth of Virginia. When you take a county like ours that has been nothing but negatively impacted by the S-Power project in Spotsylvania County, and then we have one much smaller scale, but 400 acres here in Orange County, that is now going to its third owner, which is Dominion. And I'm hoping that it actually, when it does get developed, that Dominion does the right thing moving forward. But we have had no positive experiences, to be very honest with you. And with all of the construction that's going on with infrastructure, it's very difficult to understand on a local level how such a vast amount of land usage for solar panels is the way to go when there are the other technologies out there. And it seems like it would be a lot easier if it was divided up a whole lot more. But I know the east end of our county is a strategic point, and we keep having solar companies that are contacting landowners and trying to arrange lease agreements before they even ever come talk to the county about what is the posture of the county. Is there something they could do to work with us? It's like everything's being done backwards and through the back door. So I just want you to be fully aware there are major, major challenges to accepting everything that's been adopted, because it's not been presented in a positive manner in many jurisdictions. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's not a one size fits all, and what's good for one county definitely might not be good for another county. Again, I don't know how to suggest that local governments get in front of that. Certainly, staying in touch with the permit by rule process would help. Not with the huge Spotsylvania size ones, but the permit by rule, it will help when the notices of intent come in, just to keep your eye on the prospective projects. The other thing is get in front of it from a land use planning standpoint and try and build that into long-term land use plans and identify where the most appropriate places are. One thing, distributing it out throughout the state, I work a lot with the folks out here in Southwest Virginia. I'm looking out at the mountains now, and they're open for business. You got the issue with infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, again, the modernized grid. How do you get large generation sources that are in one part of the state to another part of the state when that has not been the traditional directional flow? Southwest Virginia, we have hundreds of thousands of acres of previously mined sites out there. And the challenges in Southwest Virginia is more of an open arms. They would like to see projects like that because it's already on disturbed lands. There aren't large population centers. There's not communities that are in close proximity. So a lot of the challenges that more urban and suburban counties are faced with don't impact the sites out here. So that's another thing that could happen, that a lot of that infrastructure could be put in parts of the state that don't have the demographics that would make it less attractive. There's other challenges like the infrastructure and wires, but as far as from a development standpoint, the opposition would, I'm not saying it would be non-existent in Southwest Virginia, but it would be very, very much different.
I have a question from Kathy Bender in King George. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I'll piggyback off of Jim's comment. We have already had a couple of people who wanted to put solar farms on large farm tracts, and they were speaking to the owners before the county. So, you know, there was some of that already built up opposition probably coming. And then the other question is, we've had battery manufacturers kind of make inroads in discussions with our EDA. What kind of space is needed for those big battery distribution or storage areas? And what is the environmental impact long term, or do they even know to having those on land? Thank you.
Just like anything else, I would say the size of those depends on the capacity they have and what kind of technology they're using. I really can't answer that question. I would say this, though, whatever size they are now, you could expect that size and impact to go way down in the future. Batteries will experience a orders of magnitude emergence. At some point, there'll be some type of breakthrough that really reduces the size and the cost of them. From an environmental standpoint, again, it depends on what technology is used as far as the battery storage system itself. I would add, just like with a lot of other things, it would be good to send clarity with respect to what's required from a local standpoint, from the local fire department and whatnot. I know that when I was in the ethanol business for a while, and ethanol storage really was a concern for local fire officials, and there didn't seem to be any single strategy at managing that risk. And it eventually evolved, but there was a struggle with every time a vendor wanted to put up a fueling station that had ethanol, dealing with the local fire code officials was different in almost every county. And so that's the type of thing that, you know, we should try to avoid with respect to battery storage. Send some clear signals and make sure the fire and code officials are comfortable with the management strategies that are out there.
Yeah, thank you, John, for that. This is just VACO staff wanted to add a little bit of information on the battery storage. One of the first ones that's been negotiated for land use in Sussex County was just recently done. And I do know that I think as a part of the agreement, and they were using the host side agreement with that as well, they've got some payments in there to help train their local fire department, I think a volunteer fire department. So there's definitely an opportunity to work with developers that are putting in large scale, particularly lithium ion, to do that. I don't know, John, if Larson, if you had any other thoughts or comments on that.
No, I think that's a very good point. And in some of my prior roles, I actually was in our generation business development, and it was pretty routine for me. And granted, most of the development was not in Virginia at that time, but you would always meet with the local government, and you would talk about some of these challenges that you're mentioning, as far as you know, whether it be infrastructure for any type of first responder or anything unique about your facility, to have those discussions so that could be a well-informed decision that's made as you move forward for any type of conditional use permit. So I think you'll see that as projects move forward, and in particular the ones that Dominion Energy is involved with, you will receive you know, a lot of communication and contact from the state and local affairs team, as from the generation business development team. That would just be a normal path that would be included in that process. So should expect, I would expect that you would see that. As far as some of the other developers and where PPAs will be taking, that's an interesting aspect, and I think creates an opportunity to make sure that there's some communication about expectations as individuals move forward with their projects.
Ian, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. And seeing Mike Skiffington's name down here reminds me of all those meetings about the fracking and how this reminds me that same lack of information and lack of ability of local governments to be on the front side of things was another example that I hope you all will not follow, because Dominion has a really good plan that they did successfully for several different transmission projects in Albemarle, where they set up advisory committees and met with the people along the route. While there was great concern at the beginning, every time this was done, and it took a few months and it was effort, but it was so worthwhile because then they had a group of people who at least understood. They may not have all agreed, but they understood what needed to happen, and it was all for good reason, et cetera. That didn't stop us from then going back to the SEC and demanding that they use the bronze towers instead of the aluminum foil shiny ones. But that was separate from the fact that we had this process that allowed people to be engaged. So I do hope you will reach back into your files and bring back that best process. One of you made a comment about how going where the demographics seems to indicate there'll be less resistance. Be very, very careful, because that is probably why the Buckingham County area of Union Hill was chosen for that compressor station. And that was the most egregious, vicious lining up of people who shouldn't have the ability to fight back, and brought in lots of people from all across the country to help them. So really take to heart those words you're saying about the social justice elements of this as this goes forward, because we will be all wanting this to turn out as well as possible, but we're a little skeptical, or some of us in the countryside are a little skeptical. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann. One other thing following up on battery, and maybe it's a question for both Johns, is looking kind of at the future. We're going to see more battery storage, and understanding, at least from the literature review we've done here at VACO, is that the batteries will wear out more often than the panels, the solar panels, if they're paired up. It's just that I think the nature of how they're used. There doesn't seem necessarily right now to be a recycling market, maybe even globally or nationally, for, I guess, batteries. And maybe you all know whether that is the case or not. And this all, I think, goes into electric vehicles as well. Do you think there's an opportunity for Virginia to take a lead on recycling these things and helping develop an industry and a workforce around that?
So this is John Larson. I'll speak to the fact that, yes, there is certainly, if you think about battery installation, you start out with just like your battery in your phone, right? So you start out and you can go forever and a day without having to charge. And as your phone gets I'll say, more age on it, you may find that you don't get quite the same life out of that. So you will see a similar aspect to that with batteries, and with some of the battery limitations. As far as recycling and how to manage batteries once their useful life, can they be repurposed for other industries or other uses? I don't know to the extent that can be done. And as far as would the Commonwealth or a position on that, as far as being, would we want to set up a business, recycling or disposal business? John, I'll ask. I don't know if there's been any dialogue. I know we haven't been involved in any dialogue to that extent yet.
Yeah, no, I'm unaware of any movement on that. That doesn't mean that it's not happening, and doesn't mean it wouldn't be a good business, but I'm not aware of any.
Yeah. I wanted to mention one thing that came up, and Ann, you mentioned rural areas, and actually I was in our electric transmission group when some of the initial collaborative efforts, starting with setting up stakeholder groups. And those are always great opportunities to make sure that all voices get heard and understood. And so that's a great point you made there. But with the infrastructure build out that will be required to support renewable generation, and here I'm talking about the grid, don't forget there's a great opportunity to take advantage of rural broadband, because almost any of that infrastructure will include fiber, or virtually it will all include fiber. So there's a great opportunity, and I speak a little bit from experience. My daughter is a teacher, and just trying to make sure that students can stay connected and work in today's environment, and that individuals can take advantage of training or workforce development activities and participate. Being able to get online is becoming, as we've all seen with the COVID crisis, more and more important. So it's certainly an opportunity as we think about that infrastructure that has to be built. How can we also think about underserved communities from a connectivity perspective as well? So it's a great opportunity to lever that and look at additional resources to expand some of the projects that are already announced and looking at moving forward. But how do we even take that widespread so that anyone virtually should be able to access high-speed internet service?
Thank you, John. And this committee will know. Anne, do you have another question? Go ahead.
Does Albemarle sign up? Because our CVEC customers are getting fiber to every home, but the grand majority of the county residents are your customers, and we have been given the stiff arm as far as doing anything similar. So how quickly is this going to happen? Because we're spending millions paying the wrong people right now, and I really don't want to see that continue.
Yeah, so I mean, we provide the middle mile, as we said, to get the internet service out there, and then there has to be a local internet service provider and to be able to make the last mile connection. So the role that was set up with the initiative is really us getting it out on our infrastructure and then working with the local internet provider to get that to the homes.
Yeah. Thanks,
Hey,
Tony.
Hey, sorry.
Kathy.
As some may know or may not know, King George County is part of a 4-county group that has submitted a VATI grant with Dominion and Northern Neck to provide that mid-mile. A lot of it's in my Shiloh district, but one of the problems that we're having is that our local cable provider claim that they serve communities that they technically do on the map, but they don't, because the infrastructure that you have to put in as a customer, me being one of them, is a high entry to the market. So for myself on my road, it would cost $27,000 to put the line in just to bring it to the house. And so we're technically served under the regulations at the moment, but we're not. And we're hoping to make a way so that these utilities can bring to all those customers so they have more choices and not just one cable company can say we serve that area. I hope you understood that in the end. Very passionate about that.
So Kathy, as I understand it, you applied for the VATI grant with Dominion and other localities in the Northern Neck. Has there been a challenge by the cable provider?
Atlantic Broadband.
Okay, that's important to know. All right, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, one thing to add, and this members of the committee that are audience today, they've been made aware of this, and I'm sure both Johns are aware of it. And John Warren, you had it, I think, in one of your slides, the opportunity zone host site agreements. Explicit in that legislation from this past year was the ability to negotiate an applicant for a utility scale solar, negotiate with the host locality on providing broadband. So that's one that's readily available. And I know that the governor's broadband team, in concert with a representative from MDVCA, which is the solar industry, I think they recently did an outreach to let everybody know about that opportunity. So that is a good point for everybody. I don't know, are there any other questions for our great panelists today? This has been a great discussion. All right, having seen none, going once, twice, 3 times. All right, I want to thank both our panelists, John Warren and John Larson, and of course our sponsor for today, Dominion Energy, and for you all for being on today's recording. This will be available for the membership for our registered participants during our annual conference. And I will provide, some copies of the slides that John provided. We'll have those on the web landing page. I'll send them to the committee. And also some of the links, such as to the Dominion IRP, some of the things that were mentioned, we'll go ahead and get those up on that landing page as well. So take care, everyone.